Welcome to Sleep With Me, a space where the shadows speak softly and the night listens patiently. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Drop your location and time in the comments below, and let's connect across the hours, whether it's dusk, midnight, or just before dawn. Tonight, you'll hear 5 eerie stories, whispered in gentle tones. They carry no screams, no sudden shocks, only the slow unfolding of unease, like the sound of footsteps behind you in a long-forgotten hallway. So settle in, dim the lights, let your thoughts drift. And if you find yourself slipping into dreams mid-story, that's perfectly fine. That's what we're here for. When you're ready, let's begin with our first tale. This story comes from a quiet village in the north, where stone houses stood clustered around a single well, and the mist rolled in each morning like breath from the earth itself. At the edge of this village stood an old parsonage abandoned, overgrown, but still standing. The windows were long boarded, the roof missing a few tiles, but it remained largely untouched. The villagers didn't approach it, not because of any one event, but because of what they'd heard, always after sunset. In the autumn of 1932, a retired schoolteacher named Mr. Corvin moved into the parsonage. The old house stood empty on the edge of town, and so it had been cheap. It was an excellent price for a home that large, even if it did have the reputation of being haunted. But Mr. Corvin was tired of the clamor of the city, tired of the noise and commotion and crowds of people. He wanted nothing more than a quiet house on the edge of town where he could live out his remaining days in peace and silence. The house itself was fine, if a bit worn. There were cobwebs in the corners and dust on every surface. But with a few weeks of cleaning, it was almost good as new. He liked the layout of the house, enjoyed the solitude. It was everything he'd hoped it would be. It was also, as he soon discovered, impossible to keep the upstairs door closed. On his second evening in the house, he was reading quietly beside the fireplace in the living room when he heard it, just a slight creak from above. Then the distinct sound of a door handle turning. It was followed by the soft thud of a door swinging open. He sat very still. The sound came again, this time louder, and he could make out the muffled voice of someone walking back and forth directly above him. Then the footsteps stopped, the door handle turned again, and silence fell over the house. He shrugged off the strange sounds, telling himself it was probably just the wind. When he went to bed that night, he did so without a sound. But in the morning, he got up early and went to investigate the door upstairs. The upper floor had only 3 rooms. The front room was the master bedroom. Next to it was a smaller room where he planned to store his things, and opposite the landing was a third room with 2 windows. He checked each of them. All the locks were intact. None showed any signs of disturbance. He walked from one to the other, listening intently. There was no sound of wind, no drafts. He returned to the third room, the one closest to the stairs. It was locked, but he turned the key in the door anyway. Inside, he made sure the window was shut and double locked. He checked the latch, tested the hinges. Everything was tight. He closed the door firmly and latched it, then returned to his reading. But the next morning, he got up and went to the kitchen to make breakfast. As he poured the water for his tea, he heard a distinct click. He froze, staring at the door. It swung open, wide, silent, still. He stared at the door for a long moment before he shrugged. Perhaps he hadn't closed it properly. So he crossed the hall, relatched the door, then left to finish his breakfast. When he returned, the door was closed, but the lock was loose and the door handle hung at an angle, broken. He tried to push the door shut. It wouldn't budge. It was stuck fast. He examined it closely and noticed a nail hole hidden by the paint near the top. Someone, it seemed, had tried to nail the door shut. That afternoon, he fetched a hammer and some nails and carefully hammered the nail into place. He felt a sense of satisfaction at his handiwork. That would have to do. When he awoke the next morning, he heard the telltale click of a door handle turning. He lay very still, listening intently. Silence. He waited until the faintest sound of movement below the stairs before he got up. He crept to the door and peered through the keyhole. The rope lay coiled neatly on the floor, as though unwound with purpose. Mr. Corvin, increasingly unsettled, began sleeping downstairs. But even there, he could hear it. Every night, just past 3 in the morning, he would hear the door above swinging open. A single creak, an absolute stillness. He tried everything. He blocked the door with a heavy table, but it scraped aside easily. He nailed the latch shut, the nails bent. He tried barring the door with a heavy wooden plank. That too was pushed aside. One night he tied the door shut with a length of rope, making sure it was tight. In the morning, the rope lay coiled neatly on the floor as though unwound with purpose. Then he tried flour. He sprinkled the floor before the door with flour. That night he waited. When the sound came again, he waited. Morning came. The flour had been scattered in a wide arc, as though something large and unseen had passed through, slowly dragging its weight. When he went to investigate, he found no prints, just the disturbed dust and a trail leading out, toward the attic stairs. A week later, he found a set of old stairs hidden behind a tapestry hanging in the hallway. They led to the attic. He climbed wearily and found a dusty box tucked in a corner. It was made of wood and fastened with a simple latch. He pried it open, and inside, folded neatly, were 5 letters. The first 4 were addressed to men. The 5th was to a woman. Each was written in a different name. Each dated back 40 years. Each one said the same thing in different words. There is something in this house that waits, and it will not leave, and it will not let you go. The first 3 letters ended with the writer swearing an oath to kill the thing, to trap it or starve it out, to exorcise it, to drive it back to whatever hell it crawled from. The 4th letter was different. This one spoke of resignation and sorrow, of hopelessness and fear. The author admitted defeat. And the last one, the one addressed to a woman, simply said, "I boarded the door, but it never stays closed." At the bottom of the box, nestled against the letters, was a small silver key. He took it down, examining it curiously. Where did it fit? What did it unlock? He carried it with him as he left the attic. His hand brushed against the wall, and he realized the loose plaster hid a keyhole. He turned the key. It fit perfectly. He looked up. The keyhole was in the door, the one he'd been trying to keep shut. He struggled to unlock it, but the key turned easily, and the door swung open. Slowly, Mr. Corvin vanished in early spring. The villagers found the parsonage unlocked. Nothing was missing. The front door was wide open, and the floor littered with dead leaves. But there was no sign of Mr. Corvin anywhere. He left behind his breakfast on the table, half-eaten bread, and a spilled cup of tea. He left his chair in the corner, and on his desk, a single page. In his neat, precise handwriting, it read, "I have tried to be kind, but it is cold now, and it keeps opening the door." They found the door upstairs flung wide open. The nails were curled on the floor, beside it like sleeping insects. And in the living room, on Mr. Corvin's desk, another letter. This one wasn't like the others. It wasn't written in any language the villagers recognized. Some of the symbols were crudely drawn, as though the writer wasn't sure of their shape. Others were elegant and swirling. The letter began with greetings and pleasantries, spoke of family and friends. It told a story of life and love and laughter. But halfway through, the tone shifted. The lines became angry, bitter, and the words themselves twisted into grotesque shapes. Then the letter ended abruptly, leaving the reader hanging on the last line. It was the final entry in a long-forgotten diary. It was also the last warning, for in the days that followed, more and more objects began appearing on the doorsteps of the parsonage. They came in the night, these things. Sometimes they were heavy, dragging the door open wide, knocking the welcome mat into the street, and leaving footprints in the dust. Other times they were light, just brushing the door open enough to slide a note beneath it. These were the messages of the thing that waited in the house on the edge of town, the thing that wouldn't let go. Have you ever encountered anything supernatural? Let me know in the comments section below. The river slow and gray curves through the countryside like a silver ribbon. Its banks are soft with moss and thick with willow roots. Fishermen used to cast their lines at first light, standing quiet in their boats as fog curled around them like smoke. It was one such morning decades ago when the first story was told. A man named Harlan failed to return. His boat was found near the bend, empty, drifting against the reeds. On the mudbank, only one footprint remained, disappearing into the fog. Harlan had been an early riser, the type who hit the river before the sun stretched his shadow long. He knew every inch of its current, every whispering reed, every likely lie. To have met with mishap was unheard of. Yet there was no sign of struggle, no cries for help. In the stillness, only the lapping of water and the rustle of wings from startled coots. The village woke to a light drizzle, which hushed the whispers but didn't wash away the unease. That day, they combed the banks, finding nothing but pebbles and the echo of dread. After Harlan, there was silence. Then the river gave up its secrets. Weeks passed, the memory of Harlan fading into routine until one day it returned, vivid and stark. A young girl, Ilara, had been gathering wood for her family's hearth. Winter's grip was tight and every branch counted. She walked the path beside the river, humming a tuneless song, her basket swinging at her hip. The river was low that winter, revealing the tangled roots that bound the willows to its banks. Ilara skipped stones across the surface, watching them vanish into the gray expanse. Suddenly, a splash. Startled, she whirled around, heart hammering. There, on the opposite bank, stood a woman. She was tall and slender, framed by mist and moving slowly. As Ilara watched, rooted to the spot, the woman raised her head. That's when the girl noticed the dress, white as snow and clinging to her as she moved. Water dripped from its hem, tracing paths through the fine grains of mud. Ilara couldn't see her face, not clearly, but she sensed the woman's eyes, dark and deep, boring into her. And then the woman started to walk again, melting back into the haze. Panic seizing her, Ilara ran. She ran until the cottage chimney loomed ahead, its smoke curling like welcoming arms. Safe inside, she poured out her tale to her grandmother, her voice shaking, her eyes wide with terror. But her grandmother only stroked her hair, a knowing look on her face. That night, nestled under her quilts, Ilara thought of the woman. Was she a spirit? A lost soul wandering the river's edge forever? The chill of fear snaked down her spine. And so it began, the mystery of the woman in white. Over the years, tales intertwined, creating a tapestry of myth and memory. The woman became a part of the landscape, her story echoing in the wind rustling through the reeds. Local lore ties her to a tragedy a century earlier, a wedding barge that overturned on a stormy crossing. All aboard survived, except the bride, whose body was never recovered. They say her spirit waits still, not for revenge, for vengeance, but to finish her journey. They say the river claimed her, but her story lingered, whispered in hushed tones by the firelight. The bride, they called her Eliza. Young, beautiful, she'd been betrothed to a wealthy landowner from a neighboring village. The ceremony was grand, the feast hearty, and the mood jubilant. But as the celebration wound down, the sky darkened, mirroring the bride's unease. She'd heard tales of the river's capricious nature, and as the wedding barge set off, a knot of worry tightened in her stomach. The river, usually placid, was a raging torrent, tossed by winds unseen. The groom, Lord Ashford, stood by her side, his hand firm on hers. But even his stoic presence couldn't quell the rising tide of fear within her. Then the unthinkable. A rogue wave struck, throwing everyone into the churning water. Amidst the chaos, Eliza found herself swept away from the barge, her white dress a beacon in the gray gloom. She struggled, but the river's pull was relentless, dragging her down into its icy depths. Her last memory, the horrified gasp of her ladies-in-waiting, their faces pale and etched with fear before they, too, disappeared into the swirling water. When the sun rose, casting its golden rays over the river, it unveiled a scene of devastation. The barge, capsized and waterlogged, lay abandoned on the riverbank. Ashford, bruised but alive, stumbled out of the wreckage, his face drained of color. He spoke of Eliza in a voice hoarse with grief, his eyes reflecting the depths of his despair. A search party was organized, but the river yielded no answers. Only whispers of a drowned bride carried on the wind. Some said she walked the riverbank, her white dress a haunting sight. Others claimed to hear the distant echo of wedding bells, their melody laced with sorrow. Many who've seen her claim she doesn't walk alone. If one stares long enough, a second figure sometimes emerges behind her, a groom, perhaps veiled by mist. As the seasons turned and years rolled by, the legend of the woman in white took root, intertwining with the river's flow. Villagers whispered of those who ventured forth to meet her, their steps soft, their hearts heavy with unspoken longings. One by one, they disappeared into the mist, leaving behind only echoes of their footsteps and the scent of damp earth. These were not rash souls, but steady folk, their lives anchored by duty and love. A farmer, Thomas, known for his sturdy frame and quiet strength, was one of them. He'd come to the river's edge every dawn, not to fish, but to listen, some said. The baker's daughter, Amara, with eyes as bright as the loaves she kneaded, sought solace in the river's murmur. They whispered, but why? What bond could tie them to this spectral woman and the secrets she held? The truth, like the river, ran deeper than met the eye. Those who vanished left behind neat rows of shoes, their polished leather gleaming against the rough bark of ancient trees. Carved into each shoe, a heart entwined with the initials of the beloved they'd left behind. Thomas, his initials carved deep. Amara, hers delicate and small. Each shoe sat perched on the bank, as if waiting for its owner's return, oblivious to the chill of the grave. Search parties found no footprints, no signs of struggle, no whisper of a fight, just fog and the hush of slow-moving water. Some said the fog was their shroud, binding their souls to the river's embrace. Others claimed it concealed their path, guiding them to the woman in white. Despite her legend, no one feared her. The woman in white became a fixture of the landscape, her story weaving itself into the fabric of the town. Children learned of her in hushed tones, their imaginations painting vivid pictures of a ghostly bride gliding through the mist. Lovers whispered her tale to each other, seeking perhaps a connection to something eternal in their fleeting romance. Even the bravest of souls approached her with reverence, their footsteps lighter, their voices softer as they neared the river's edge. Old Man Hemlock, who'd scoffed at tales of ghosts, softened upon seeing her. Once he'd wagered that not even he would follow her into the mist, yet found himself walking beside her on a foggy morning. He never spoke of what he saw, but the twinkle in his eye hinted at the wonder he'd discovered in the river's embrace. Picture her now. She walks the riverbank, her white dress billowing behind her like a bridal train. Her face is hidden in the shadows of her hood, her eyes gazing not at you, but through you, lost in the depths of her own sorrow. You might catch a glimpse of her fingers, slender and pale, trailing mist with each step she takes. Or see the faint imprint of a wedding ring on her right hand, a symbol of a love cut short. As you stand there watching her, Enveloped by the thick fog, you feel not fear, but a profound sense of loss, a poignant reminder of love, life, and the lingering touch of the river. There's something quietly unsettling about places made for stillness. Cemeteries, fields of stone, where time doesn't flow, but settles. The graveyard belonged to a village so small, it wasn't found on most maps. A simple plot of land surrounded by low walls and rusting iron gates. Generations rested there, tended lovingly by the same caretaker, an old man named Ellis. It was his grandfather who had taught him the ways of the graveyard, how to cut the grass without leaving a mark, how to plant flowers without disturbing the roots of the old oak, how to trim the hedges into shapes that kept the evil things out. One morning, Ellis arrived early to trim the grass. But something was wrong. A chill hung heavy in the air, despite the sun. And when he neared the old oak, he saw that something had disturbed the leaves piled there since autumn. Then he saw the headstones. They were new, 6 of them, perfectly aligned. Each was a monolith, gray and unyielding, polished to a shine even though they'd been carved smooth. There were no names, no dates, no engravings except one thin line cut across each. He examined them closely. They weren't there the day before. He'd walked the full grounds at dusk, tending the dying embers of a funeral pyre. He was certain. He hurried home, pulling his wife aside when no one was listening. "I don't know what to do," he whispered, eyes wide. "There are 6 new stones in the graveyard. I swear I didn't see them yesterday." His wife placed a calming hand on his arm. "Don't fret, love," she said. "We've never had much call to report such things, but if it's any concern, the sheriff will deal with it." The next day, the town council gathered, men with worried faces and women clutching lace hankies. There were only 300 souls in their valley, and their biggest problem had been the vagrant sheep of Old Man Hemlock. The graveyard was their most peaceful place, until now. The sheriff, a young man whose father had died in the line of duty, looked grave. "Vandalism. Probably some city slickers come to mock our peace," he declared. No way a local would be so bold. Though none could explain the craftsmanship. The stones were heavy, their engravings deep, even if the engravings said nothing. When Ellis arrived that afternoon, the headstones gleamed in the sun, mocking him with their silence. No doubt the sheriff would have them removed, melted back down to blocks in some quarry's furnace. But Ellis couldn't bear to touch them. He sat beneath the old oak, its leaves rustling secrets in his ear. He thought of his grandfather's tales, of the graveyard's ancient magic, of the hedge roots binding spirits to the earth, keeping them from wandering the world as restless ghosts. But something had brushed against those roots, something powerful, something ancient. Ellis knew then what he had to do. He cleared his throat and stood. "Let them be," he said, his voice hoarse. "Leave them here. I'll take care of them." And so he did. Every morning he brought wildflowers to set beside the stones, tucking them between the cracks of the cold gray. Every night he walked the graveyard's bounds, chanting words he hardly understood, but which echoed with power in his blood. And each night the wind carried new whispers to the village below. And one night, more markers appeared. 3 in number, and then 3 more, and then 6, always at dusk, always blank. By the 7th day, there were 33 new stones. Some bore markings of tools, others seemed rent by teeth or claws, but none revealed anything of their origins. Fear began to bloom in the village like a fungus. First, rumors formed, then they spread. Each stone was a place reserved, waiting for whom? No one dared ask. Soon, townsfolk whispered of an evil stirring in the hills, of a creature feasting on souls. Most kept away, but some felt called to visit the graveyard after dark, as if their name was whispered among the dead. And one night, they found a woman sleeping beside a new marker. She was old, her skin like wrinkled parchment, her eyes cloudy with age. Her name was Agnes. No one knew when she'd come to the village, but many remembered her house, choked with weeds and vines, the windows like vacant eyes. She'd kept to herself until now. The townsfolk gathered around her, fear and pity warring on their faces. When the young constable knelt beside her, asking questions, she opened her eyes and rasped, "It has my shape." Before anyone could reply, she went still and the villagers hurried home, fear lending speed to their steps. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices tight with terror. Some said the old woman had taken leave of her senses. Others claimed she'd heard her own death knell and moved her marker to stand beside it. But that wasn't the end. For 3 nights more, new headstones arose, and then the graveyard fell silent. The people waited, holding their breaths, but no new stones appeared. But neither did the old ones vanish. Ellis kept watch, his hope and dread growing daily. Then one morning he came to tend the graveyard and saw, or thought he saw, that one of the stones was missing. It was still twilight, too dark to tell for sure, but when he returned at dawn, the stone was gone. No trace remained. Grass grew over its foundation, hiding the cold, hard earth beneath. He searched the entire graveyard, but no other stones were moved. Only that one. At first, they vanished slowly, one every few days, sometimes a week, sometimes 2. The villagers watched anxiously, whispering prayers. But as the seasons turned from green to gold to brown, the pace quickened. 2 stones vanished in a night, then 3. And Ellis, walking the bounds each evening, felt a growing dread coil in his gut. Those who had stood near their markers, those who had dreamed of them or touched them in the day, each passed quietly in their sleep within the year. None suffered sickness or injury. Each simply breathed one last time and went still. And when they were laid to rest, their bodies were buried in the soft earth, not beneath the cold stones, but in the same row where their stone had once stood. Today, the graveyard is peaceful again. The original stones remain, weathered and still, bearing witness to generations past. But there is a corner, half covered by ivy, where the grass grows strangely smooth, as if disturbed more recently than the rest. And when fog rolls in from the hills and the wind is quiet, a nameless marker can still appear, just for a moment, just long enough to read your shape. And now, as a special treat, I'm going to read a story I wrote called The Mirror House. The house stood alone on a hilltop, half hidden behind thorned hedges and wild rose. It had once belonged to a painter, reclusive and eccentric, who lined every hallway and room with mirrors. Not ordinary mirrors, but those of his own making, curved and tinted and hand-ground glass. Every one different, every one strange. After the painter passed, the house sat vacant, or so everyone thought, until one blustery autumn day when a young woman named Eva arrived to claim it as her own. See, the house had been willed to her by its previous owner, her eccentric Uncle Arthur. Though the two had never met, Eva knew him well through stories her mother told. Stories of a man who painted pictures of thin air and spoke to flowers. A man who gathered shards of colored glass and painstakingly ground them smooth by hand into perfect pieces of reflective art, then hung them in his house to capture and distort the meager light that dared filter through the lace curtains he insisted on keeping drawn during the day. Eva had inherited some of her uncle's paintings too, wrapped carefully in brown paper, devoid of any identifying marks except for one enigmatic title scrawled on an aged scrap of cardboard: The Mirror House. So when the solicitor confirmed that the house was hers, Eva knew without being told where it was. It was this house that sat hunched and shadowed on the hill like a brooding gargoyle. A house whose windows glittered faintly from a mile away. Windows which upon closer inspection resolved themselves into mirrors. So Eva had come to the Mirror House to escape, to hide away from the world and its prying eyes. At first, she found the house charming. Sunlight dripped through the trees and splashed the worn Persian rugs in patterns of gold and green. Each mirror seemed to shimmer uniquely in the morning light. And as she explored further, Eva discovered more treasures, stacks of books with well-thumbed pages, antique typewriters, cabinets filled with bottles and jars of paint. There was even a greenhouse choked with overgrown vines and weeds, though how long it had been since anyone had tended to them, she could not tell. It wasn't long before Eva found a place she liked best, a small spare bedroom at the end of one of the hallways. It had a bay window overlooking the garden and the burnished silver of a full-length mirror propped against the wall. After settling in, it was the first thing she hung a new tapestry above it, a calming landscape she hoped would encourage the sun to shine in more often. And she placed her bed directly beneath it. But by the second day, Eva noticed oddities. One morning, as she brushed her teeth, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror and blinked. Twice. Once. Twice. Her reflection blinked once, but then twice, as if mimicking her. Another time, while standing in the kitchen, she smiled at a funny thought, then glanced back at the stove as if to make sure she hadn't left the burner on. When she turned back, her smile still lingered, as if frozen on her face. A heartbeat too long. Then there were the nights. Sometimes when passing the mirror in the hall, Eva would swear she saw herself pause, motionless, staring back at her, as if unsure whether to follow. All of these incidents were easily explained, she told herself. Tricks of the light, tricks of perception. After all, how many times had she read about people losing their minds in houses like this? Houses that preyed on loneliness, driving their inhabitants insane. Of course, she was being foolish. This house was just a house, albeit one with an excessive amount of mirrors. Still, she tried to avoid the mirrors at night, as well as during the day. Now, whenever she turned to face them, she couldn't help but wonder what sort of warped version of her she'd see back. One night, however, she awoke to a terrible crash. Startled, she sat up in bed and listened. Silence. Then she remembered the mirror over the fireplace in the living room. Hadn't hung it straight. Perhaps it fell. Taking a deep breath, she got out of bed and crept toward the door, each step echoing loudly in the silence. As she approached the fireplace, she could hear the sound of crackling glass. Then she saw it. The mirror was cracked, but only in its reflection. In reality, the mirror hung straight. Its surface was smooth and whole, yet in its depths, jagged lines radiated from the center, spider webbing across the silvered surface. Trembling, Eva reached out and ran her hand over the glass. Cold, smooth, no rough edges anywhere. The crack was only in the reflection, a false image appearing in every mirror as she passed. The next day, she went into town to buy supplies to cover them. But even as she worked, patching and pinning sheets over the cracks, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was merely hiding things rather than fixing them. Besides, the damage was far too extensive to fully conceal. By nightfall, the sheets were neatly folded on the floor beside each mirror, each pane gleaming, waiting. Days turned into weeks, then months. Spring arrived, painting the hillsides in fresh greens and pinks. Yet Eva spent most of her time indoors, reading and writing. The mirrors became a part of her daily routine, a source of creeping dread and quiet fascination. Then one evening, Eva was wandering through an upstairs corridor, lit only by the glow of the dying embers downstairs when she stopped. Her reflection did not. In the dim light, she could just make out the figure of a girl standing still, arms at its side, head slightly tilted as if listening. Frozen, Eva backed away slowly. In the mirror, her reflection remained, not moving, unmoving. From that night on, Eva slept with the lights on, though sleep evaded her most nights anyway, for fear of waking to find her mirrored self staring back at her from the foot of the bed. But it wasn't the only thing she feared. Something else stirred within the house. Sometimes when she least expected it, Eva could hear the scrape of a chair leg on the hardwood floor, a footstep on the stairs, or the soft tinkling of a piano. But when she rushed to the source of the sound, she found nothing but empty rooms and closed doors. One morning, Eva awoke to find her bedroom mirror facing the window, though she had never turned it. It reflected nothing but open sky and something standing behind her, tall and gaunt with wide, soulless eyes and a smile that promised untold horrors. With a scream, Eva fell back. The creature glided closer, and she could see its skin was stretched taut over jutting bones, like tissue over a skeleton. Its fingernails were long and curved. Its lips split into a grotesque grin, revealing rows and rows of sharp teeth. Then it opened its mouth to speak, but before a sound could escape, it vanished. Eva scrambled back, bumping over her writing desk. Papers flew everywhere. Her inkwell tipped over, spilling its contents across the carpet. And that's when she saw it, scrunched up in a corner, a scrap of cardboard. She recognized the spidery handwriting immediately. This must have been the title card for the painting she had seen in her dreams, or perhaps the one that had been hanging in the hallway all along. But she could not bring herself to look. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Eva had packed a single suitcase. That night, she left the house in a hurry, glancing back only once. She had meant to destroy the house, she said, but it sat perched on the hilltop, dark and silent, windows glittering in the moonlight, daring her to return. Locals say that sometimes on misty evenings, as they pass by, they see figures shifting in the upstairs glass, though no lights are on and no one lives inside. The painter's mirrors were not meant to show us what is, they say, but what's waiting behind what we choose to see. Every Wednesday and Friday at 4 a.m., I come to you from a village at the edge of the mountain. There are maybe 200 people here, most of whom I'd never seen before I moved in. They're simple folk, strong of arm and taciturn. There is, however, one thing they will talk your ear off about, the bell that tolls for none. They say it's best I show you first. This is the chapel of St. Elswith, which sits at the very edge of the cliffside. The stone is pale, the roof caved in years ago, and the windows are frosted with age. The bell tower leans slightly, its frame warped by cold and time. No one has climbed its stairs in 50 years. In 1871, lightning struck the bell. It split clean down the middle. The sound it made when it broke was said to echo across the mountain range for a full minute. And then silence. Absolute. They never replaced the bell. Too heavy. Too cursed, some said. But starting in the early 1900s, villagers began reporting something odd. Once or twice a year, always before a heavy snow, someone would wake with the sound of a single toll in their ears. Not loud, not close, but unmistakable. It would wake them at the same time. 4 a moment. At first, it didn't seem important. After all, what is the chance that any of us would wake at precisely 4? But it kept happening. And eventually, the villagers began to keep count. 23 tolls. 23 deaths. What makes this particularly eerie is that each person whose death coincided with the bell toll had once been involved with the church in some way. A former choir singer. A caretaker's son. A man who once rang the bell before it cracked. The toll seemed indiscriminate. You could have been an atheist or a saint. It didn't matter. The bell claimed those who'd worked with it and those who'd opposed it. Even the innkeeper's wife died after hearing the bell toll, despite the fact that she poured holy water down the tower as a child and vowed she'd never hear its ring without cursing the earth beneath her feet. The only thing that seemed to prevent the bell from ringing was snow. As long as there was snow on the ground, the bell remained silent. But on clear nights, especially those right before a blizzard, you could bet it would toll at 4:03 a.m. So naturally, when I arrived here 2 months ago, I found myself keeping an eye on the skies and an ear to the floor. So far, no bells. That is until last night. Of course, it was snowing. Blizzard actually started right after I awoke to the sound of it. I looked out the window. It wasn't much, a little dusting, really, but enough to make the branches bow and the rooftops disappear under a thin layer of white. And that meant only one thing, I suppose. I hadn't heard the bell, not while it was ringing anyway. But sometime after it fell silent, I could swear I felt its echoes reverberating in my skull. I told myself it was the wind. The mountain always howls at night. But still, I lay awake listening, trying to convince myself that I hadn't heard a low, hollow sound that could only be described as a bell. Then this morning, I learned the old caretaker had died. Died in his sleep, peacefully, his granddaughter told me. He was quite old, but he was looking forward to Christmas. He wanted me to know that, even though I'd never met him, he wanted to be sure I understood the mountain doesn't forget its children, even when they return after many years away. Of course, it wasn't the first time I'd heard these words. Every few weeks, someone says something similar to me. They mean well, I think, but it's hard not to feel as though they're implying I'm somehow responsible for this, for the bell. And it's true. I should have known better than to come back here. My mother warned me as much. She was born and raised in this village and left as soon as she could. The only reason she's still here now is because she can't afford to move. According to her, the bell claims those who are close to the chapel, but it also targets those who leave and try to forget. It pulls them back in, tests their resolve, and if it finds them weak enough, it claims them. For years, I thought this was just superstitious nonsense. I'm a scientist, for God's sake. I don't believe in curses. But then my brother died. He took his own life. I wasn't close to him, not really. He was younger than me and had always resented me for the life he saw I had. I was the golden child, the one who got to go to college, get a real job, and live in a city. He enlisted in the army instead, and eventually became a mechanic. We weren't close, but I grieved. I flew back home and sat shiva with my parents. I let them coddle me as I cried, even though I didn't really cry. And afterward, I stayed in their spare bedroom as I tried to figure out my next move. I couldn't stay there. Seeing the place where he grew up, walking the streets he'd walked, eating the food he'd eaten, it was too much. I felt like I was being smothered by grief, even though I hardly knew my brother. I left the next day, flying back to my sterile city apartment where nothing reminded me of him. Within a month, I forgot he'd ever existed. But I haven't forgotten the sound that woke me in the middle of the night and followed me around like a shadow for days. Now I'm back on the mountain, trying to piece together what happened to my brother. Was he troubled? Did he talk to anyone about what he was going through? What could have driven him to end his own life? But mostly, I'm trying to figure out if I can trust what the villagers tell me. If the bell really woke me last night, if it's somehow calling me back here as my brother did before me. This afternoon, I decided to climb the tower. D.R. Harpley, the skeptic who stayed in the chapel overnight in 1979, wrote about this. He left behind a stack of papers in the rectory, detailing his investigation. He stayed in the tower. He set up equipment, watched the chamber with binoculars, even placed a recorder in the bell itself. At 4 a.m., everything went still. His notes state, I quote, "I heard it. One toll, low, hollow, as if from below. None of my devices captured it, but I heard it, and I do not want to hear it again." He left the village that morning and never returned. I thought maybe I could prove it wrong, once and for all, show everyone, including myself, that the bell is silent. As I started up the tower, the snow gave way under my boots and the wind tore at my jacket. I could barely hear my own thoughts over the howling. When I reached the top, I stepped into the bell chamber. Nothing but dust motes danced in the sliver of light coming through a crack in the roof. Then I heard it. I don't know if it was the wind or the bell. All I know is that when I turned to leave, my foot gave way and I fell. I landed hard, knocking the breath out of me. Pain shot through my ankle. I tried to stand, but I couldn't put any weight on it. Luckily, the opening was only a few feet up from the ground. I managed to scramble out onto the ledge. Then I noticed the recorder. It was lodged in the crack of the bell, and the red light was blinking, meaning it was recording. Slowly, painfully, I hauled myself to the door. I escaped just as the snow began to fall in earnest. Back in the chapel, I listened to the recording. It was nothing but wind. Disappointed, but relieved, I made my way back to the village. I limped to the rectory. Mrs. Gabor saw me and rushed out of the house. Her face was creased with concern. She helped me inside. "Are you hurt?" Her voice was sharp. "Why are you soaked? Why are you covered in snow?" I shrugged. "I fell," I lied. She ushered me to the couch and brought me tea. "You should go to the hospital," I said. She shook her head. "No, you must stay here. Your mother will be home tomorrow, and I won't allow her to worry." And so I spent the night in the rectory, drinking tea and watching the snow fall. Before I knew it, the sun was setting and shadows stretched long fingers across the yard. I told Mrs. Gabor about the bell. She nodded, eyes distant. "It tolls for none," she said finally. "But sometimes it seems as though it does. Sometimes it tolls for those who think they can escape its song." I didn't bother arguing. Instead, I asked if she remembered the caretaker. She did. He'd been kind, she said. I asked if he'd mentioned anything about his hearing the bell recently. She shook her head. He didn't speak much of it, but he never stopped worrying about it. I think it bothered him greatly. Do you think it bothered him that he survived or that he died? I didn't have an answer. I didn't think she wanted one. And that's when I knew I wasn't staying another night here. I thanked her for her help and hurried home. The snow had piled up, burying the path. I trudged through drifts, sinking up to my knees at times. When I finally reached my door, my fingers fumbled with the keys. It was only when I stumbled inside that I realized why. One of my gloves was missing. If you enjoyed this story, please give us a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Thanks for watching.